hat size not supposed to grow. Your shoe size isn't supposed to grow 2 or 3 sizes. And you're not supposed to go at age 38 from a lifetime batting average of 290 and all of a sudden hit 370 and 362.
Yeah, no.
You're not supposed to have a lifetime slugging percentage of 556, which is good, but nowhere near the top of the list. Lifetime slugging average of 556, then slug 863 and have 2 other seasons over 800 and one at 799 in your late 30s and early 40s. It's incredible to maintain a high level of performance when most players are declining, let alone to improve stratospherically over anything you've ever done with an established pattern of performance for 13, 14 years, or anyone in the whole history of the game has ever.
For decades, Bob Costas was the voice that made you feel like baseball mattered more than any other game on earth. He brought elegance to the broadcast booth, poetry to the play-by-play, and a respect for the tradition of the sport that felt almost sacred, like he was protecting something precious that belonged to all of us. But that reverence turned to rage. Costas became a moral referee, calling out heroes and labeling achievements as hollow or tainted. Pete Rose, the all-time hits leader, passed in September 2024, reigniting debates about legacy and whether Costas protects the game or just plays judge. If you want this story to reach more baseball fans and spark the debate it deserves, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype, so we can keep bringing you deep dives into the legends who shaped and scarred the sport in ways we are still trying to understand. 7 legends Costas clashed with from bottom to top. Number 7. Curt Schilling. This one is different from all the rest on this list because Schilling never got caught up in the steroid mess that poisoned so many careers. No PED links. His numbers are clean in that sense, and they are spectacular. 3,116 strikeouts. 216 wins, a postseason record of 11 wins and 2 losses with an earned run average of 2.23, peak postseason dominance. Hall of Fame numbers. Costas said in 2019, it was when, not if. But then something shifted in the culture and in the conversation. Schilling's post-career life got loud and messy and impossible to ignore. His social media presence became a minefield of controversial takes that alienated huge portions of the baseball community. And the writers who vote for the Hall of Fame started to rethink what the character clause really means when everyone has a platform and every bad opinion lives forever on the internet. Costas found himself in an uncomfortable position, which is rare for a man who usually knows exactly where he stands on every issue. He does not attack Schilling's pitching because there is nothing to attack, but he has acknowledged the complications in public statements. The character clause in the Hall of Fame guidelines is supposed to measure integrity and sportsmanship, but does that apply to what a player does after retirement, when the uniform is hanging in a closet and the cleats are gathering dust? Schilling's support on the Hall of Fame ballot started strong, hitting 71.1%, which is close to the 75% threshold needed for induction. But then it dropped to 58% after he asked to be removed from the ballot entirely, frustrated by the way the process had turned into a referendum on his politics instead of his pitching. Costas observed that some people view the Hall as a marketing tool for baseball's image. A plaque in Cooperstown is not just about stats and wins and strikeouts. It is about representing the sport's best values, being an ambassador for the game even after you stop playing it. And Schilling's post-career behavior made that impossible for a lot of voters. Schilling became a test case for a fundamental question. If you let him in based purely on pitching, you are saying performance trumps everything else, that what happens on the field is all that matters, and the rest is noise. If you keep him out based on his public heel turn and the damage he did to baseball's reputation, you are saying character counts even after the uniform comes off. That being in the Hall of Fame is a privilege you can lose by being a bad person in retirement. Costas seems torn between these two positions, but the fact that Schilling is even on this list, even as the lowest ranked name, shows how much the Hall of Fame debate has evolved beyond just looking at numbers on a page and deciding if they are good enough. Number 6. Pete Rose. This is where Bob Costas' philosophy gets tangled up in mercy and punishment, and the question of whether redemption is ever possible for people who break the most sacred rules and then spend decades lying about it. Rose is the all-time leader in hits with 4,256, a number so massive and unreachable that it feels like it will stand forever, a monument to consistency and longevity and sheer relentless effort over 24 seasons. But Rose also broke the cardinal rule, the one that is posted in every single major league clubhouse in bold letters that nobody can miss. Do not bet on baseball. Rose did it anyway, and then he lied about it for decades. Looked reporters and commissioners and fans straight in the eye and swore he never did it, that the accusations were false and the evidence was manufactured. Costas has been firm and unwavering on the ban from employment. He supports keeping Rose out of any job in professional baseball, whether that is managing or coaching or working in the front office, because the integrity of the game depends on that bright line that cannot be crossed. If you gamble on the sport you manage or play, you are done forever. No exceptions, no second chances. The rule exists for a reason, and Rose knew the rule and broke it anyway. But here is where Costas gets interesting and almost compassionate in a way that surprises people who think he is just a heartless moralist. He distinguishes between Rose's eligibility for employment in baseball and his presence in the Hall of Fame, arguing that those are two separate questions that deserve two separate answers. Costas has proposed what he calls a simple solution that feels almost elegant in its clarity. Induct Rose into the Hall of Fame as a player based on his 4,256 hits that nobody can take away from him, but include a statement at the bottom of his plaque that reads, "Banned from baseball in 1989 for life," as part of the official historical record. Costas argues that justice can be tempered by mercy and common sense, that the punishment for gambling should be permanent exclusion from employment, but not permanent erasure from history. The hits were earned before most of the gambling took place, or at least before we have definitive proof that it was happening during his playing career. And the Hall of Fame is supposed to be a museum of baseball history, not a moral purity test where only saints get in. But Commissioner Rob Manfred has refused to lift the ban, and his reasoning cuts deep. Manfred says Rose lacks contrition and a mature understanding of his conduct. Rose still does not get it, still does not understand the damage he did or why it matters. Costas seems frustrated by that assessment, not because he wants Rose back in the game as a manager or coach, but because he has interviewed Rose multiple times over the years and watched him dodge the truth over and over again, watched him lie even when the lies were obvious and pointless. Rose spent years, literally decades, denying he bet on baseball, calling the accusers liars and conspiracy theorists, only to admit it later in a book deal when it suited him financially, and the statute of limitations on shame had apparently expired. And even now, after all the admissions and all the evidence, questions still linger like ghosts that will not go away. Johnny Bench, Rose's teammate and one of the greatest catchers in history, has wondered out loud whether Rose was betting during his playing days, not just his managing days, and if he was, then the entire foundation of his career collapses, because every at-bat becomes suspicious. Every hit could have been influenced by gambling debts or bets he needed to cover. That uncertainty haunts his legacy like a curse. When Rose passed away in 2024, the debate flared up all over again, hotter and angrier than ever. Should the Hall of Fame induct a man who broke the most sacred rule in baseball? Should they forgive him because he is dead and can no longer benefit from the honor? Or should they hold the line forever as a warning to future generations? Costas's answer is yes, induct him, but with full transparency. Let the plaque tell the whole story, the good and the bad, the 4,000 hits and the lifetime ban. Let fans know what he did and what it cost him, and let them make their own judgments about whether he deserves to be remembered as a hero or a cautionary tale. But even that middle ground feels uncomfortable for a lot of people, and Costas's own ambivalence, the way he struggles to balance punishment and mercy, shows just how hard it is to separate the player from the person when the person spent decades lying and never showed real remorse. Number 5. Sammy Sosa. The summer of 1998 should have been pure magic, the kind of baseball season that saves the sport and reminds everyone why they fell in love with it in the first place. Baseball was still bleeding from the disaster of the 1994 strike, when owners and players destroyed an entire World Series over money and left fans feeling betrayed and abandoned. People were angry, disillusioned, ready to walk away and find something else to care about. And then Sammy Sosa and McGwire started hitting home runs at a pace that felt impossible, that made you check the box scores twice because the numbers could not be real. Sosa was the lovable one in that chase, the guy who blew kisses to his mother in the stands and ran out to right field with a hop in his step, like a kid playing Little League. He surpassed 60 home runs in 3 separate seasons, a feat that seemed to prove he was not just a flash in the pan, not just riding a hot streak, but genuinely operating at a level that defied historical precedent. Costas was there for all of it, calling games, feeling the electricity in the stadiums, watching grown men cry when Sosa and McGwire hit milestones. But later, years later, when the truth came out about the performance-enhancing drug era, Costas described that summer as hollowed out, like a beautiful memory that got poisoned retroactively by reality. It is like finding out your favorite childhood movie was made by terrible people, and now you cannot watch it the same way ever again. When the performance-enhancing drug era became undeniable, when the evidence piled up and the denial stopped working, Costas looked back at those absurd numbers and felt betrayed on a personal level, not just professionally as a broadcaster, but emotionally as a fan who wanted to believe. The fans who invested in that summer, who gathered around televisions and radios shows and believed they were watching something pure and historic had been sold a lie, and the emotional damage from that betrayal cannot be calculated. Costas has said the game became unwatchable for people who value context and history because the numbers were so inflated they broke the internal logic of the sport, made it impossible to compare eras or understand what greatness even meant anymore. If Sosa can hit 66 home runs in a season, what does that say about Babe Ruth's 60 or Roger Maris's 61? Are those achievements diminished, or do they become more impressive because they were done without chemical help? Sosa and McGwire became symbols of a chaos that nearly ruined baseball's credibility. And while McGwire eventually admitted to using steroids and tried to apologize, Sosa has stayed mostly silent, which makes it even harder to process the betrayal. Silence feels like guilt, like an admission that cannot be spoken out loud. Costas treats Sosa as part of a collective betrayal, a player who took the magic of 1998, the summer that was supposed to save baseball, and turned it into a cautionary tale about what happens when the pursuit of records becomes more important than the integrity of the game. That summer was supposed to be redemption. Instead, it became Exhibit A in the case against the steroid era, proof that the whole thing was rotten from the start. Number 4. Mark McGwire. If Sammy Sosa was the lovable one in the 1998 chase, Mark McGwire was the giant, and I mean that literally. 6 feet 5 inches tall, 250 pounds of muscle that looked sculpted by something other than genetics. A man who looked like he was built in a laboratory specifically to hit baseballs over fences and into the stratosphere. In 1998, McGwire hit 70 home runs, shattering Roger Maris's single-season record of 61 that had stood for 37 years and felt untouchable. Costas was there for every swing, every milestone, every celebration, and at the time it felt like a gift from the baseball gods. The sport needed a hero, needed something to make people forget the strike and the greed and the ugliness, and McGwire delivered in ways that felt almost too good to be true. And it turns out it was too good to be true. The magic did not last because it was never real. McGwire's later admission that he used steroids during that entire season retroactively ruined everything, turned the most exciting summer in baseball history into a fraud that makes people feel stupid for believing in it. Costas has spoken with real sadness, not anger but genuine grief, about how that summer got hollowed out, how the emotional investment that fans made, the hope and joy and belief that baseball was back, turned out to be based on a pharmaceutical enhancement, not natural talent. For Costas, the issue is not just that McGwire cheated and broke the rules. It is that the numbers he put up were so absurd they made the game unwatchable for anyone who cares about historical continuity and context. When you compare McGwire's 70 home runs to the numbers from previous eras, when you look at what Babe Ruth did or Hank Aaron or Willie Mays, it does not fit. It breaks the logic of the sport. It is like someone claiming they can run a marathon in 30 minutes. The number is so far outside the realm of possibility that it stops being impressive and starts being suspicious. Costas describes the steroid era as a chaos that nearly destroyed baseball's credibility, and McGwire is one of the central figures in that collapse, one of the main characters in a tragedy that hurt millions of people who just wanted to watch a clean game. What makes it worse is that McGwire eventually came clean, admitted what he did, but only after years of evasion and a famously awkward congressional hearing where he refused to talk about the past and dodged questions like a guilty man with something to hide. Costas respects honesty, even late honesty, even admissions that come years too late to matter. But he cannot forgive what that summer cost the sport. 1998 was supposed to be baseball's redemption story, the season that brought fans back and proved the game still mattered. Instead, it became a symbol of everything that went wrong, when players and owners and the media all looked the other way because home runs were good for business and ticket sales and television ratings. Number 3. Alex Rodriguez. If Barry Bonds was raw power and confrontation, a man who attacked critics head-on and never apologized for anything, then Alex Rodriguez was the complete opposite in terms of presentation. Polished to a shine, calculated down to the smallest detail, the epitome of the professional athlete as a cross between a stage-managed boy band and a corporate pitchman selling products to demographics. Costas has described Rodriguez's career as meticulously managed, a trajectory that felt less like a natural rise through talent and hard work, and more like a branding exercise designed by marketing executives in boardrooms. And the problem is not just the image, the fake smile, and the corporate endorsements in the sense that nothing about him was real. It is the performance-enhancing drugs that kept showing up in his story like a recurring nightmare. Rodriguez had multiple connections to PEDs, spanning his time with the Texas Rangers all the way through the biogenesis scandal in Miami, and each revelation made it harder to believe anything he said or did. He admitted in federal court, under oath where lying has consequences, to using performance enhancers during his 2007 MVP season, the year he won the award for being the best player in the league while cheating. And he reportedly paid $900,000 to a relative to keep quiet about his medical connections, which is hush money, which is consciousness of guilt, which is proof that he knew what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway. For Costas, Rodriguez represents something more insidious than just a player who cheated. He represents a period of transition that fundamentally damaged the historical continuity of baseball stats. The idea that you can compare players across eras and have those comparisons mean something. The game became more bureaucratic, more standardized, more efficiency-driven, and the artistry of the past, the beauty and creativity and individual style, got replaced by raw output and launch angles and exit velocity. Rodriguez's numbers are impressive on paper, no question, but they feel synthetic, like they were manufactured in a laboratory rather than earned through sweat and talent and years of dedication. Costas does not just criticize Rodriguez for cheating, although that is part of it. He criticizes him for turning baseball into a corporate product, where the player is less important than the brand, and the brand is built on lies that everyone pretends to believe. Rodriguez's public persona was so calculated that it created a detachment from the fan base, a sense that nobody really knew who he was or what he cared about beyond money and fame. And when the PED connections kept surfacing, over and over again, like bodies floating to the surface of a lake, it confirmed what a lot of people already suspected deep down. This was not a natural athlete reaching his peak through hard work. This was a constructed icon whose greatness was synthesized rather than organic. And for Costas, that is an unforgivable betrayal of what baseball is supposed to be at its core. Number 2, Roger Clemens. Clemens is the biological paradox that drives Bob Costas absolutely crazy because the numbers make no sense if you believe in the natural aging process and the way human bodies work. Pitchers are supposed to decline in their late 30s. It is not optional. It is biology. Their arms wear out from throwing thousands of pitches at maximum velocity. Their velocity drops from 95 miles per hour to 90, then to 85, then they retire. Their bodies break down from the accumulated stress of a career spent putting unnatural strain on joints and ligaments. That is the natural curve of a baseball career, the arc that every pitcher follows whether they like it or not. But Roger Clemens did the opposite, and that is what makes Costas lose his mind. Clemens got better as he got older. He dominated in his late 30s and early 40s at a level that defied everything we know about aging and athletics and the limits of the human body. Costas has called this statistically impossible without exogenous help, outside pharmaceutical intervention, steroids or human growth hormone or some cocktail of chemicals that let him cheat time itself. Clemens achieved a level of late career performance that has no natural precedent in the entire history of Major League Baseball. And for Costas, that statistical anomaly is proof enough even without a failed drug test. It does not matter that Clemens never got caught in the traditional sense. The numbers themselves are the evidence, the smoking gun that proves something unnatural was happening. When a 40-year-old pitcher throws harder than he did at 30, when his body gets stronger instead of weaker, when he defies every biological rule we understand, that is not training or nutrition or good genetics. That is chemistry. Costas has consistently argued that Clemens was a great athlete in his younger years, genuinely elite, a Hall of Famer based on his early career alone. But his late career achievements, the Cy Young Awards he won in his 40s, cannot be viewed in the same light as the achievements of previous generations who played clean and aged naturally and watched their skills decline like everyone else. And that belief, that conviction that Clemens cheated even without a positive test, informs Costas's broader stance on the Hall of Fame and what it should represent. He has advocated loudly and publicly for keeping suspected steroid users out of the Hall entirely, making it clear that suspicion is enough, that you do not need proof beyond a reasonable doubt to protect the institution. Or at the very least, if you must induct these players because their numbers demand it, then ensure that their plaques explicitly acknowledge the era they played in, and the controversies surrounding their statistics. This transparency model is designed to prevent the historical record from being permanently distorted, to make sure that future generations understand the context and can make their own judgments. For Costas, Roger Clemens represents the ultimate test of what the Hall of Fame stands for. Do you reward the numbers even if you suspect they were artificially enhanced and fraudulent? Or do you protect the integrity of the institution even if it means keeping out one of the most dominant pitchers who ever lived? Number 1, Barry Bonds. This is the feud that defines everything Bob Costas believes about baseball and integrity and what happens when greatness gets corrupted by greed and chemicals. Bonds versus Costas is not just a disagreement about statistics or Hall of Fame votes. It is a philosophical war about what baseball means, who gets to decide what counts as legitimate, and whether the truth matters more than the spectacle. Costas has been absolutely relentless in pointing out that Bonds' career underwent a fundamental transmutation, a shift so dramatic and so suspicious that it defies the natural aging curve of an athlete and demands explanation. Before 1999, Bonds was already a Hall of Famer, and Costas has said this repeatedly to make it clear he is not denying Bonds' early talent. His lifetime batting average through the end of 1998 was .290, and he hit a home run every 16 at-bats. That is elite. That is historically grounded. That is undeniably great without any qualifications or asterisks. But then something changed in Bonds' body and his performance. And the change was so extreme it looked like a different player wearing the same uniform. Bonds entered what Costas calls the stratosphere, where his numbers became statistically untethered from previous historical precedents and floated into a realm that made no sense. His head got bigger. His body got more muscular. His power exploded in ways that violated every rule of aging and biology. And when he broke Hank Aaron's career home run record, an achievement that should have been celebrated as one of the greatest moments in sports history, Costas described it as ambivalent and tainted, words that cut deep because they strip away the joy and replace it with suspicion. The underlying allegations of cheating overshadowed the achievement completely, turned it from a celebration into a crime scene. The personal animosity between Bonds and Costas hit its peak when Bonds, frustrated by the constant scrutiny and the questions that would not go away, called Costas a little midget man and questioned his fundamental knowledge of the game, as if being short somehow disqualified Costas from understanding baseball or reporting facts. Costas's response was a masterclass in using humor to reassert authority and destroy an opponent with a smile. He said, "As anyone can plainly see, I am 5 foot 6.5 inches tall and a strapping 150 pounds. And unlike some people, I came by all of it naturally." That line was not just a joke for the audience. It was a direct shot at Bonds' alleged physical inflation, a way of saying that Costas' body might be small, but it is real, while Bonds' body might be impressive, but it is fake. Costas went even further, arguing that his physical stature was completely irrelevant to the validity of the information he was reporting, dismissing Bonds' insult as an ad hominem attack, the kind of desperate move typical of people who have no credible argument and resort to personal attacks because they cannot win on facts. For Costas, the issue with Barry Bonds is simple and clear. Bonds was great in his 20s and early 30s, genuinely one of the best players in baseball. Then he became superhuman in his late 30s, and that transition was not natural. It was pharmaceutical. It was cheating. And when the home run record fell in 2007, when Bonds hit number 756 and passed Hank Aaron, it did not feel like a celebration of excellence. It felt like a funeral for the integrity of the numbers, for the idea that baseball statistics mean something and tell a coherent story across generations. Costas believes baseball is unique among American sports because the statistical records function as a historical record, a way to compare Babe Ruth to Willie Mays to Barry Bonds and have those comparisons mean something real. Any artificial inflation of those figures, any cheating or pharmaceutical enhancement, is a strike against the game's institutional soul, a betrayal of everyone who played clean and everyone who cares about the truth. Bonds represents the ultimate symbol of that betrayal in Costas's mind. His 73 home runs in 2001 are a statistical anomaly, a number so far outside the historical norm that it breaks the internal logic of the sport completely. And for Costas, that makes Bonds the player he dislikes most on this entire list, not out of personal hatred or petty grudges, but out of a professional lament for what the game lost when it allowed players like Bonds to rewrite the record books through chemistry instead of talent. But Costas's critiques do not stop with these 7 names, because the rot goes deeper than individual players. He has also taken aim at Jose Canseco, the whistleblower who was ultimately right about the facts of the steroid era, but wrong for the game in his presentation and his motives. Canseco wrote a book called Juiced in 2005, naming names and exposing the widespread use of performance enhancers across Major League Baseball. The Mitchell Report, the official investigation into steroids, later vindicated much of what Canseco said, proving that he was telling the truth even when people called him a liar and a traitor. But Costas views Canseco as a symbol of chaos, a man who profited from destroying the internal trust of the sport, who turned the steroid scandal into a money-making opportunity instead of trying to fix the problem quietly. Canseco may have told the truth, and telling the truth matters, but he did it in a way that felt exploitative and self-serving. And for a traditionalist like Costas, who values decorum and respect for the institution, that makes Canseco hard to stomach. Canseco is the messenger the baseball establishment treated with a mixture of acknowledgement and disdain, a necessary evil who helped expose the problem, but also made it worse by turning it into a circus and a spectacle. And then there is the modern game itself, the way baseball is played today, and Costas hates it. He has gone after the 3 true outcomes approach with real venom, the strategy where a plate appearance most often ends in one of 3 results: a home run, a walk, or a strikeout. Nothing else matters under this philosophy. Contact does not matter. Moving runners over does not matter. Putting the ball in play and forcing the defense to make plays does not matter. Costas sees this as a decline in the artistry of baseball, a loss of the skills that once defined legends like Rod Carew and Tony Gwynn, players who could control the strike zone and put pressure on pitchers and make things happen without hitting the ball 400 feet. Costas argues that the focus on power and launch angle has led to a generation of players who cannot do the small things, who strike out at rates that would have been embarrassing in previous eras, but are now considered acceptable. He often points to Tony Gwynn as the antithesis of the modern slugger, the perfect example of what baseball used to value. Gwynn averaged fewer than 22 strikeouts per season over a 20-year career, striking out once every 23.57 plate appearances. That level of contact and control is almost unimaginable today. In contrast, modern leaders in contact, like Luis Arias, strike out far more frequently, once every 14 plate appearances, and that is considered elite in the current era. For Costas, this shift represents a fundamental change in what constitutes an elite hitter, a change that severs the statistical links between generations. The game played in the 2020s is so different in style and mechanics from the game played in the 1920s that you cannot compare them anymore. So where does this leave baseball and the Hall of Fame and all the arguments that will not die? Costas has spent decades building a case against the modern era, arguing that the sport lost its way when it prioritized individual achievement and entertainment over institutional integrity and honesty. His critiques of Bonds and Clemens and Rodriguez and Rose and all the rest are not expressions of personal animosity or petty feuds. They are professional laments for the loss of what he considers the game's essential truths, the things that made baseball special and different from every other sport. And now, as the Hall of Fame continues to exclude these legends year after year, the tensions Costas has documented are reaching a breaking point that feels unsustainable. The character clause, written into the Hall of Fame guidelines by the board of directors, remains the primary hurdle for all these players. It says that voters should consider integrity and sportsmanship, not just statistics. Bonds and Clemens spent 10 years on the ballot, seeing slight gains in their voting percentages, but never enough to cross the finish line. Bonds rose from 59% to 66% before falling off the ballot entirely when his time ran out. The era committees now hold the keys to their potential induction, and it remains to be seen whether these smaller groups of former players and executives will be more or less favorable to the candidates Costas has spent his career criticizing. Schilling requested to be removed from the ballot after his support dropped from 71% to 58%, frustrated by the way his post-career controversies overshadowed his pitching. And Rose remains on the permanently ineligible list even after his death, with no clear path forward and no consensus on whether he deserves forgiveness. But Costas has also suggested a potential solution, a way forward that acknowledges the messy reality of baseball history without abandoning the moral standards that define the Hall of Fame. He has proposed that the Hall should function as a museum of the sport's entire history, including its darker chapters, the scandals and the cheaters, and the people who broke the rules. By inducting suspected steroid users or banned gamblers with plaques that detail their transgressions in plain language, the Hall could maintain its commitment to historical accuracy while upholding its moral standards. A plaque for Barry Bonds could acknowledge his greatness before the alleged PED use and then explain what happened after, letting visitors understand the full story. A plaque for Pete Rose could celebrate his 4,000 hits and then state clearly that he was banned for life in 1989 for gambling. This transparency model would allow fans to make their own judgments about these players, rather than erasing entire eras from the record or pretending the controversies never happened. It is a middle ground, a compromise between Costas's hard-line stance and the reality that baseball has always been messy, full of flawed humans who did extraordinary things on the field while making terrible choices off it. But as long as the permanent ineligibility list remains a barrier, and as long as the three true outcomes continue to dominate the modern game, the rift between the traditionalist view Costas represents and the reality of baseball today will likely remain unresolved. And maybe that is okay. He has spent decades defending the same principles, even when it made him unpopular with players and fans, even when it put him at odds with the biggest stars in the sport who could have made his life difficult. That kind of conviction is rare in any field, and in a world where everyone seems willing to compromise their values for clicks or ratings or social media followers, Costas stands as a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. Baseball is not perfect and never has been. The game has survived scandals that should have killed it, past scandals from Black Sox to steroids. The question is, what story baseball tells itself? Will it be honest or erase the uncomfortable parts? Costas wants the honest version, the messy version, the version that admits baseball is played by humans who make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are unforgivable. And that might be the most loving thing he could do for the sport, demanding that it live up to its own ideals instead of settling for comfortable lies. So here's the truth. Bob Costas does not hate these legends as people. He hates what they represent in the larger story of baseball's decline from grace. He hates the choices that compromised the integrity of the numbers and made it impossible to trust the record books. He hates the lies that followed the cheating, the decades of denial and evasion and half-truths. He hates the way the sport prioritized short-term profits and television ratings over long-term credibility and institutional health. But underneath all that frustration and anger is a deep, abiding love for what baseball used to be and what it still could be if people cared enough to fix it. And maybe that is the real legacy of the Costas era, not the feuds or the critiques or the moral judgments that made him famous and controversial, but the reminder that baseball matters in ways that go beyond wins and losses, that the numbers tell a story that connects generations, that the history is a living thing that deserves to be protected, that the game at its best is something worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. And if that means calling out the legends who broke the rules and tainted the records, then so be it. Someone has to be the guardian of the record. Someone has to care enough to fight when everyone else is ready to move on and forget. And that someone has been Bob Costas. If you made it this far through all 7 names and all the controversy, do me a favor. Hit that like button so this video reaches more people who care about baseball history. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into the legends who shaped the sport and the feuds that still matter. And drop a comment telling me whether you think Costas is right to hold this hard line, or if he is stuck in a romanticized past that never really existed. And if you want more stories about the players who changed baseball for better and worse, stick around, because we are just getting started with this series.